and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, and welcome to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler, and we are going beyond today. We will touch on the Bering Sea. This is going to be a very unique episode, as I am going to interview Commander Brad Boyd of the United States Navy as first-person interview as the USS Nautilus. So this is going to be interesting. First, Commander Boyd, thanks for taking the time to do this.
No problem. Happy to help.
And to become the USS Nautilus, which you've dedicated a lot of time to.
I'll do my best to stay in character for you.
Okay, so here we go, guys. So, Nautilus, can you tell us where you were born?
Yeah, so my keel was laid on January 14th in 1952 when President Truman stamped his initials into my hull. And from that point on, I was constructed at Electric Boat, Groton, Connecticut, about 2 miles from where I sit right now. And over hundreds of people worked on me, and over thousands, probably tens of thousands of man-hours were used in constructing me through my launching in January of 1954 and my ultimate commissioning on September 30th, 1954.
What was your first experience getting out to sea for the first time? How did that go?
So my very first experience was in January 1955, when on the 17th of January I was going down the river and was underway on nuclear power for the first time. I'm the first vessel in the world to ever have nuclear propulsion for my primary system.
How did you feel about that, being the first?
I was very proud. So it was a major accomplishment. The United States Navy was leading the way for nuclear power on vessels, obviously, being I was the first vessel, submarine or surface vessel, to ever have nuclear propulsion. However, we were also leading the civilian industry in the safety standards that would be set for upcoming operations.
So how did going from, I don't even know what the power was before that. Was it diesel powered?
So before that, the primary methods were diesel as your primary engine, and then batteries when you're actually submerged and away from the air. The submarine has been on that since the 1900s. The very first one was gasoline, but they figured out pretty quickly that's probably not the best thing to do. It's a little unstable and it can go boom. Also, some toxic fumes. So they went to diesel engines, and that was the primary method and really the only method up through World War II. The Germans experimented a little bit with a hydrogen peroxide fuel so that you could actually run the diesel engine while submerged. It worked, although you run out of fuel eventually because the hydrogen peroxide takes up more volume than just regular fuel does because you have to bring the oxygen with you. But I didn't really have to do that. So with nuclear power, it's all self-contained, and so therefore I was divorced from the atmosphere, and that was the major accomplishment that nuclear power brought for the submarine force. And from that point on, the primary focus was on nuclear-powered submarines vice the conventional diesel power. We'd build a few more, but we'd really shifted to the nuclear power model.
How was the reaction of the people around you when you first launched? I mean, did this have a big effect on the view of the Navy when you first set sail?
Absolutely. My start ushered in the new age where the submarine is no longer tied to the surface. Immediately following World War II, the country of concern was obviously the Soviet Union as the Cold War kicked off, and our nation was effectively blind to what was going on behind the Iron Curtain, and the only intelligence we could really get came from the submarine. However, anti-submarine warfare technology had drastically improved over the course of World War II, and our diesel boats were being forced back to the surface in very embarrassing situations because we're now operating and spying on the Soviets. Nuclear power allowed us to not be tied to the surface and be able to conduct operations freely and independently, such that we could evade the Soviet fleet and we could gather the intelligence our country sorely needed.
What was the longest dive prior to you entering the water? What was the longest dive for a sub?
Prior to my submergence, the longest dive would have been about 36 to 48 hours. The limiting factor for a submarine prior to nuclear power was twofold. One was obviously the battery. You had to have enough propulsion to be able to get back to the surface. And two was oxygen on board. So whatever you went down with is all you had. There's no ability to introduce oxygen back to the crew, and no ability to get rid of carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. When I went to sea, I did not go with an oxygen generator. That came around in the 1960s. However, I went to sea with liquid oxygen tanks in my main ballast tanks, and we would bleed oxygen into the hull so that my crew could live. This gave me about a 3-week endurance time frame underwater.
From the first time that you felt the water go over your back, how long were you under that time?
The very first time was just a few hours, just a quick verification that everything was working. But my first true underway happened in May of 1955, when on May 10th I left Groton, Connecticut, and went to San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's 1,100 nautical miles. I stayed submerged the entire trip, and I set every record there that to date for longest submerged transit and highest sustained speed transit.
How fast did you go?
My top speed was 22 knots, and so I was averaging about 16, 17 knots all the way there.
What was the top speed of a boat before you did this?
Top speed of a diesel boat submarine would have been about 17, 18 knots on the surface and about 8 or 9 knots submerged, and that's a very short sprint. The limited speed submerged was primarily due to the fact that the battery capacity and our ability to discharge the battery. We could only take the juice out of the battery so fast, which limits how fast you can make the boat go.
Now, what kind of effect did that have on the crew you had on board? The 3 weeks underwater, that was the first time ever.
So when I went to sea, we actually went with a full-on medical doctor. And he was not there for nuclear power concerns. He was there because they didn't know what was going to happen when the hatch went shut. As I said before, it was 36, 48 hours, so a day and a half to 2 days was the most that somebody would stay underwater. Now we're talking 3 weeks. So they wanted to do a psychological evaluation of my crew to make sure that they're still fit and they can handle the stresses of being underwater, because we really didn't know what it was going to be. They quickly figured out that the doctor was going to be very underemployed. The crew, being submariners, is going to have fun with him and do everything they could to convince him that they were insane, and at the very last second saying, "I'm just messing with you, Doc." So the Navy decided very quickly that we didn't need a full medical doctor on board to evaluate my crew, and we switched to an independent duty corpsman.
Okay.
So.
And then I would guess that your crew became somewhat famous. I mean, they were the first ones to do it. Did they feel some accomplishment, and how did everybody react to that first journey, or was it expected?
It both. Very, very proud. My crew was handpicked, so we were hand-selected to be on the very first nuclear submarine because we wanted to make sure that everything went smoothly. I am very much an experimental platform for the Navy. So very first nuclear propulsion system, I was a Type 21 German U-boat design because at the end of World War II, the Germans had the deepest diving submarines, so we took the blueprints for that and put that together, and I was the first one launched with that, so I'm the first one under a new design system. I was the first one to have sustained operations underwater. I was the first one to have oxygen tanks put in to make sure that my crew could breathe. So I was very much experimental, and as a result, the crew was handpicked to make sure that they could deal with anything unexpected because we didn't know what to expect at this point. The manuals literally weren't written. So we were very proud of what we did, and we were also instantly a celebrity. So everybody wanted to be seen on board. In fact, it was very rare that I could get underway for the first about 5-6 years of my life without a dignitary on board wanting to be seen on Nautilus. From the President to the Chief of Naval Operations, Secretary of the Navy, to various submariners, to even just local politicians and movie stars alike, everybody wanted to be seen on Nautilus.
Who was the first commander to be entrusted to run you?
Commander Wilkinson was the first CO. He came on during shipyard, and he took us out. And I submerged with him for the very first time, and he was my CO until about 1957 when it turned over to Commander Anderson.
So now after making that first long trip, I assume that you settled into the everyday life of doing your job, protecting this country. But what were some of the jobs and responsibilities that you had?
So the role I played as a fast attack submarine, in fact the very first fast attack submarine, would have been to maintain security of our waters. I would conduct intelligence operations. I could interdict maritime traffic through radioing in somebody else to come. I wouldn't go surface and send my crew ashore or send them over in a little raiding craft to go talk to a ship. But I could call a destroyer or someone else to come take care of that. But I'd be the one that could find that ship for them. I would also be able to conduct special operations. And my primary job really was to be the test platform for nuclear power to verify that everything we wanted to do could be done. I would set the speed record. I would set the endurance record. I would evaluate new equipment that we wanted to put on to submarines. They'd test it on me first so that we could verify everything's going to work correctly and then roll out to the rest of the fleet. And that was my primary job throughout most of that.
I imagine that over the years of your service that you visited many foreign ports. How were you reacted to and received when you were in foreign ports?
I was very well received. Once again, everybody wanted to be seen on board Nautilus. So we went to probably the best foreign port I was at was actually in France, where in celebration of going 20,000 leagues under the sea, and my namesake Nautilus is from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We were presented in 1892 in French edition copy of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by the French government.
Do you still have that on board you now?
I do. In fact, it's on display just outside the Commander and XO's staterooms in the wardroom area.
That's quite an accomplishment. What would you say would be your greatest accomplishment?
So, my greatest accomplishment would have to be going under the North Pole. So, Commander Anderson realized that Nautilus didn't just open up the depths for long time underwater operations. He realized that to go under the ice, a submarine was the only real viable option. And so in 1957, he convinced his superiors to give him orders to go as far north as possible while he was en route to a NATO exercise. And he actually made it to 87 degrees north, so 180 miles south of the North Pole. And at that point, we had a complete navigation failure.
What happened to you?
My magnetic compass doesn't work north of magnetic north, and my gyroscopic compass failed. Gyroscopes work great at the equator because it's based on the Earth's rotation, but they don't work so well at the top of the world. My crew worked to restore my navigation. We actually ended up with a 40 nautical mile position error, and I almost ran aground off of Greenland. Thankfully, we recognized the shoaling waters and turned away to known good water. The problem was that we couldn't just turn around because that could take us back under the Arctic ice. We needed to go one way or the other to make sure that we got out to good water so that we could surface. And we managed to do that and go south, reestablish the navigation equipment, get a ship's position, and carry on to the exercise. But we took a lot of lessons learned from that.
See, I heard a rumor that you bumped your nose under the first attempt and then went and laid in Hawaii for a little while before you went back up.
Oh, that's next. So the very first attempt would have been in 1957. 1958 is the next one. So the impetus for all this is Sputnik. When Sputnik launched, the United States was very much behind the Soviets in rocket technology, at least perceived by the world. In reality, we're only about 6 months behind. The Soviets had put more emphasis on some of the practical applications, were able to get a viable rocket up. But the pressure was on, and we needed to convince the allies of the United States and our own populace that we had a viable technological response to the Soviet Union. So the Vanguard missile program, Vanguard rocket program, was accelerated, and some spectacular failures in the launch pad occurred. Every explosion kind of lessened the public's trust that we could survive and respond and hold the Soviet Union accountable to nuclear aggression, as well as our allies. President Eisenhower was desperate for a way to prove that we had military technology equal to or superior to that of the Soviets and our Commander Anderson. He proposed going under the ice and transiting from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the North Pole, proving that under ice operations were possible and that we could shift our fleet of submarines from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the top of the world and not have to go through the choke point of the Panama Canal or the long route down around South America. So he proposed it up. It was under classified orders. It was codenamed Operation Sunshine, kept at the top secret level. President Eisenhower seized on this for two reasons. One, it would prove our technological superiority in submarine operations. And two, if it failed, he didn't have to tell anybody. So the submarine service is called the Silent Service, and that's not due to the fact we're quiet underwater. It's because we keep our secrets, and the submarine force will be able to keep that secret if anything should go wrong. So thankfully nothing did. But we were transferred to the Pacific Fleet under the guise of familiarizing the Pacific Fleet with nuclear submarine capabilities. We go through the Panama Canal, and actually just a few days after going through the Panama Canal, we had some oil-soaked lagging from a small oil leak we didn't know was there on one of my turbines. that soaked into the lagging, and then when it caught fire, heavy black smoke filled the compartment. Thankfully, no damage occurred except to my lagging, and no one was injured. But Commander Anderson and the engineer quickly realized that if this had happened under the ice, we would have had no way to come back to the surface to take the bad air off the ship and bring in new air, and we'd have to have extended operations with just what we called oxygen breathing apparatus at the time. So I did not have an ability to give the crew air from my ballast tanks yet, from my air tanks yet. So what they came up with was, instead of the oxygen breathing apparatus, which is it looks like a little bladder that sits on your chest, you put a lithium hydroxide canister in it, you ignite it on fire, you have a controlled fire on your chest that actually off-gasses more oxygen than it uses, and that was the way that we breathe. But there's only so many of them on board, and there's only so many canisters, and if you don't have one, you better hold your breath and hope we get to a spot that we can swap the air out. Commander Anderson and the Eng realized that I have 4,000 pounds of high-pressure air ready to blow my ballast tanks dry in an emergency at a moment's notice. And we've already tapped into that on the ship to get 100-pound air to equipment to use air-driven equipment that needs it for starting of motors, what have you. All we needed to do was get it down to 20 pounds so that you don't blow your lungs out. And then we needed to come up with a way to deliver it to a person so they could breathe. So they made a few drawings, and when we pulled into Mare Island Shipyard for a quick resupply and outfit, we submitted it to the shipyard workers, and they said, absolutely, we can do this. And so I had the system installed on board that was PVC pipe and garden hose to a specialized mask that they could breathe from, and my crew was able to breathe from my air banks as a result. So we finished from Mare Island, we went up to Seattle, and then we made our first attempt to the North Pole. And we wanted to go from the west to the east because the most dangerous side is actually on the west side, in the Barents, and that's due to water depth. So the ice keels are deep no matter where you go, but the water depth is shallowest going through the Barents. And so there was a period of time where I was 6 feet off the bottom, and I could not tell where the ice keel ended and my top of my sail began. So we went through a couple of spots like that, and we realized that ice is just a little bit too thick, and so we had to turn around and go south. And we went to Pearl Harbor, and we waited a few weeks for the ice to thin out just a little bit. And then we get underway from Pearl Harbor and go north. Made it through the ice keels this time. Made it through the Barents. And then once we got past that, the water depth opened, and we could just run at a few hundred feet down, pretty much about 500 feet. And I ran at about 20 knots under the North Pole. And on August 3rd, 1958, I crossed 90 degrees north and proved that submarine operations under the ice are possible.
Did you stop and celebrate at all?
Absolutely not. We just carried on. Although there was a lot of people on board that were fighting to be in the most forward position of the ship. So we had one person. I was the first one to cross because I was in the torpedo room. I had another crew member on board who was taking a shower, so you could take a shower. I was taking a shower when I crossed 90 degrees north. You name it, everybody's trying to do something a little special. We did have a celebration of my cooks made a cake. We had a quick, everybody ate a piece of cake and had a quick celebration for that. And Santa Claus came in and chastised us a little bit for just running through his neighborhood, but promised that as long as we were good guests, then all of our families would get good gifts for Christmas that year.
I was going to ask how your crew reacted of going underneath, knowing that they were underneath that much ice and running that far. But it sounds like they were in pretty good spirits.
Everybody's in good spirits. We were a little nervous, but we knew that once we got through the Barents, that was the real issue, unless we had a casualty on board. Because after that, the ice may go down 120, 200 feet, but if I'm running at 500 feet and there's another 1,000 feet before the ocean floor, I've got no real duress from navigation standpoint, as long as my gyroscopes hold, and as long as I don't have a casualty that forces me back up. My gyroscopes, after the lessons we learned in 1957, they had some modifications done to them, and they held, and we were able to make it all the way through.
How long did it take you to make that run? And did you find yourself trying to run as harder than you normally would have because you were underneath that much ice?
So I started the run on 23 July of 1958, and I was under the ice on August 1st. So about 9 days later, I was under the ice. And then 2 days after that, I'm at the North Pole. And 2 days after that, I'm out of the ice on the Atlantic side. So I actually had about 4 days under the ice that I was doing all this. But we get out of the ice, and we drove over to England. And they took Commander Anderson off, so I surfaced, got Commander Anderson off. He turned command over to the executive officer who pulled her into Portsmouth. And they flew Commander Anderson back to the United States to make the announcement to the world. because President Eisenhower wanted to make sure there was absolutely no leaks. He wanted to control the information and announcement to the world of the accomplishment that Nautilus crew, that my crew had made, and so we flew him back, made the announcement, and the obvious one was we can go from the Pacific to the Atlantic to the Pacific, without having to go through the Panama Canal. The other one was the United States Navy and the Submarine Force can operate unfettered under the ice, which means we have access to the entire Soviet Union's backyard, which they thought was unassailable at that point, that they controlled it. And that meant even if we don't have ballistic missile technology, which is what everyone was concerned with Sputnik, because the next step from putting a satellite in space was to putting a warhead in space. Even though we don't have ballistic missile capability, I can still get a cruise missile off your coast, and I can still threaten you and hold you accountable.
In just a matter of days, it sounds like.
Just a matter of days.
Because I imagine going south and through the Panama Canal and back around that front door or their backyard would take a lot longer to get to.
Absolutely. In fact, submarines today are able to we can get somebody on a station off of the South China Sea, off of Japan, you name it, faster from Groton, Connecticut than I can from San Diego, California, by going under the ice.
Wow. How did you feel about the accomplishment?
I was proud. I knew I could do it, though.
No doubts?
No doubts.
So at this time, when you did do that, was there being any other nuclear submarines introduced into the fleet?
Yes. So not long after me was the Skate, and Skate actually surfaced at the North Pole 11 days after I did. We were looking for a polenya. We stole the Russian word for basically thin ice, or an area where there's free of ice. We stole the word from them because they had it and we didn't at the time. And looking for a polenya, couldn't find it. But we turned everything we knew over to Skate, and they were able to, 11 days later, the ice had thinned just a little bit more, and they were really able to find a spot and actually surfaced in vicinity of the North Pole. And the first people you see playing at the top of the North Pole from a submarine, that's the Skate.
I believe I've heard something about that. It sounds like you've had a lot of accomplishments and good times in your career. What was your scariest time when you were at sea?
So,
it's whatever you can share.
So the scariest time would have to be in 1966, when I was conducting operations off of Norfolk. I was part of an exercise, and I was working with the carrier battle group, the USS Essex carrier battle group. And I'm coming to periscope depth, and the problem that I have is I am designed off the Type 21 German U-boat design, which means I'm designed after a U-boat or a diesel submarine from World War II. Diesel submarines from World War II are primarily surface ships that had the ability to go underwater more than once. But they're designed to run on the surface and only submerge for short periods of time. I'm the opposite. I'm intended to be underwater. However, my hull design is still that of somebody who's supposed to be on the surface. So all the flow noise over the hull caused issues with my sonar, and I couldn't hear too well after about 4 knots. So I'm coming up to periscope depth, and I couldn't hear anything, and I couldn't hear the Essex. And so I'm going along, and all of a sudden, I get there's a collision, and Essex collides with the sail of my hull, and rips a quarter of it off. Thankfully, no one of my crew was actually hurt during this, but it stung a bit. I had to come back into shipyard, and there's some pictures of part of my sail just dangling as it got ripped off.
How long did it take you to get repaired up?
It took a few months.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too bad because it didn't hit any vital systems, so it was just metalwork. But it took a few months to get the sail repaired.
So how long has your service been?
My service was just over 25 years. Mm-hmm. So I was commissioned in September of '54, and I was decommissioned March 3rd, 1980.
Retired, huh?
I was retired. So I went back to Mare Island Shipyard, where I had my emergency air breathing system put in, the system to tie into my ballast tanks, my air tanks, for my crew to breathe, and retired there. And they knew that they wanted to make a museum out of me, to tell the story of nuclear power and tell the story of the submarine force, but they didn't know where to put me. And so there was a big grassroots effort to get me to where I am today here in Groton, Connecticut. But the other two options were in Washington, D.C., and the Naval Academy. Admiral Rickover, father of the nuclear navy, actually wanted me to go to the Annapolis. He thought he'd get best traction out of the public there and keep it tied to the Navy by having it where the Naval Academy is. But the grassroots effort convinced President Carter that it should be here in Groton, Connecticut.
Why?
Where I was built. So just 2 miles up the river from Electric Boat, where I was built, the sons and daughters of Connecticut are the ones who built me, and I was manned out of the. Was primarily here in Groton, Connecticut, was where I spent my service life, and so this was the place for me to come back to.
Probably felt like home.
It does. So, and on April 11th, 1986, the anniversary of the Submarine Force, 86th anniversary to the day, I opened up as historic Ship Nautilus as part of the Submarine Force Museum.
And is that where you see your future?
So I've got at least 2 more years here before I go to dry dock, because I need some refresh in my paint and some making sure that all my seals are still holding, and do a quick outfit of me. It'll be a few months long, and then I'll could be good for another 30 years here in Groton, Connecticut.
What would you say that people would get out of coming to visit you here?
So, I would say the biggest thing you're going to get is an appreciation for submarines, and what my crew has to go through in order just to take the boats to sea and provide the security that we do for our nation. You're also going to get an appreciation for just day-to-day life. You'll see what they lived in, and while modern submarines have changed in many ways, the crew conditions really haven't. So the bunks got a little bit bigger, about another 2 inches in height, so you're not smacking your head as much. But many people that have served on board submarines smack their heads and live to tell the tale.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to get an appreciation for that, and as part of the museum, you can go through there and you can see the technological change that has happened throughout the submarine force and the culture we acquired in World War II. It's really where the submarine force culture came from, is battle-hardened World War II. And then all the way up to present day, you can at least understand what the submariner goes through, if not know the exact mission that they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you've always been protective of your crew and try to keep them safe. What advice would you have for anyone listening that would think about becoming a member of a crew like the one that you had?
Well, if you want to be a submariner, we take all vocations for it. We have mechanics, be it nuclear or non-nuclear. We have weapons, the torpedo men who take care of the torpedoes, the missiles, and the firearms for when we come in port and need to provide our security. We have yeomen who do is basically the Navy word for a secretary or office assistant. We have sonar techs who who are our eyes and ears while we're underwater. I have fire controlmen who plot ship's positions contacts, and then I have quartermasters who plot ship's position between the two. I know where I am and I know where everyone else is for either targeting or for avoidance. I have supply people who ensure that I have all the supplies on board. Logistics technicians, and then I also have cooks maintain the food for the crew. We have 3 meals a day for 140 to 150 people on board a modern submarine. And then we have everything else in between that you can think of. I have IT equipment, so if you really like computers, you can still serve on board a submarine. Communications, electronics warfare, analyzing signals, all that's available. And so whatever your strength is, you still have the ability to serve in the submarine. If you want to serve on board a submarine, you have to be willing to put in some long hours. We work pretty hard. It's a smaller crew. For example, a destroyer, which is about the same size in terms of length as a submarine, but has double the crew, just because they have the space to put them on, whereas I don't. So everybody has to be able to do more work. You trust the person next to you. They have to do the job correctly, and correctly means perfectly. And you have to trust that they're going to do the job while you're sleeping, or while you're doing maintenance on something else and they're standing the watch. You have to trust that the maintenance is done correctly, and you have to be willing to handle long times at sea without seeing the sun. We screen for that. Don't worry, we're not going to put you on board a submarine for the first time with claustrophobia and you don't get to go see the sun again for another 60 days, and that's the first time you realize it. We'll screen for that and put you in tight quarters beforehand, so you know for sure. And don't worry, the Navy's not just going to throw you away. There's plenty of other jobs that need to be done. But those are the type of things you need to consider if you want to become a submariner.
So a couple questions that I want to know just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you may know this. I know you lay here most of the time. Well, all the time until you're going to dry dock. But what's the longest that a submarine has been underwater now that's not classified? without surfacing?
So I don't know the longest straight without surfacing. It's probably going to be around 80 days. Would be for would be a guess. The longest my current OIC, Commander Boyd, has been there is under 62 days straight without surfacing. The current crew that I have, one's been on board, was underway 67 days. It's usually around that, and it's not necessarily that we can't stand it longer. It's just that we typically pull into ports to give everybody a break and then to resupply up so that you can. I typically would go to sea with a 90 to 120 day loadout, same as modern submarines would, but we don't want to go down to just the bare minimum, so we're going to go down about a third to a half of it, and then we'll go and restock a little bit, so that way if we have to go out for a longer period of time, we're ready to go for extended operations.
Got to get that fresh fruit on board.
So we don't really have fresh fruit that often. So it's 2 freezers. When you're doing local operations, one of the freezers is a fridge, but when you're deployed, refrigerator stuff doesn't last as long, so we have 2 freezers, and then everything else comes out of a number 10 can, and make the food that way.
Okay, and then another one, just for fun, is in just about every movie, documentary that you see for a submarine, when they're looking up the periscope, when your commander is looking up your periscope, they always seem to say, "I have the solution." Why is it I have the solution, or rather than I have the target, or is there a story behind that at all?
Hollywood is the story. Okay. So what we do when we come to periscope depth, what my crew will do is they're looking around. They'll do an immediate search to make sure that I'm safe. So no close contacts for a collision purpose, or for an interrupted search. So we don't want somebody to see the periscope, so we lower it for a little bit, and then bring it back up. We'll put the bearing to the contact, saying I have the contact, whatever it is, and they'll give the bearing off. But what we need for solution is the firing solution. And that's not the person on the periscope that has the firing solution. That's the fire control that's going to input the firing solution, which sends the information to the torpedo, which is basically telling the torpedo where to go to find the target.
And just because it just came to my mind again, how was the Essex after you bumped into her?
Oh, she was fine. She had a little bit of repair to do, but she didn't have any major systems hit either. So she was, I think she was only about 2 months in the dry dock. I can't remember exactly, but she was very superficial repairs for her.
Okay. Well, USS Nautilus, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
I'm available for touring for the public. So my mission now is to have the public aware of the Submarine Force and aware of my history as part of the Submarine Force Museum. And if anybody wants to come visit me, and winter hours are from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Wednesday through Monday. I'm closed Tuesdays, so my crew can do some preservation on me and throughout the museum, just upkeep and that type of stuff, because I am a ship sitting in the water. So Wednesday through Monday, 9 to 4 during the winter, and 9 to 5 in the summer. After that, I'm pretty much available for anybody to come see, and I'd love to see anybody here.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk to us today. And then I know, guys, this is kind of an odd way to do the interview, but I thought it was kind of unique. Commander Boyd, you as a sailor, when did you join?
So putting on my actual hat now. So I joined June 13th of 2004.
What drove you to it?
So my father was in the FBI. There's been a long history of my family being in the military, and it's just one of those things. Not necessarily the military, but serving in some capacity has always kind of been one of the things that our family does. Not everybody, but someone usually does, and it's just something that I'd always grown up with. And looking at what to do, I liked the Navy. I've always liked ships. In fact, I wanted to go to college and learn how to design ships, but I quickly decided that naval architecture wasn't what I wanted to do, and I did aeronautical engineering instead, because I also liked planes, but I couldn't fly. And so I wanted the Navy. Thought about a pilot at first, but I wore glasses, and at the time they weren't the surgery to get corrective vision wasn't. It was a 50-50 shot whether or not I'd have a job coming out. And I liked submarines, so I did a week with everybody, all those different branches. So the surface, or communities, I should say, surface, submarine, aviation, and actual Marines. And I liked my time on board the submarine. It was a close-knit crew. I liked the mission role. And I like the idea of there's 2 types of ships in the world, submarines and targets.
Majority of our listeners all have a love for the sea, which is why they listen to a podcast that's based upon people who make their living from the sea. And I know it's a bit of a stretch to for the vast majority of my podcasts in the past have been strictly on commercial fishing, but I think that this brings a very unique view as stretching the maritime industry, because you are in fact making your living in the maritime industry. And I thank you for your service. How long have you been in now?
Just over 15 years now.
15. Is Commander fast tracked at 15?
It's yes and no. It just depends. Every year group has a different promotion rate, and that's set by how many people we have in or not in. So my year group was you get 2 looks usually for each rank, and so my first look I made it, which is when most of us usually make it on your first look. Second look is a much smaller percentage. It was at the 15-year point, but it was the same as everyone else in my year group, and it just happened to be numbers in the Navy, and every community line officers, which is submarine, aviation, surface, SEALs, they'll have one screening board for all of them, and then supply, the staff side or the medical side will have another one, and every community promotes at a slightly different rate just based off of what the numbers in their communities need. So,
what has the Navy given you?
It's given me a lot. So besides obviously having a job, which thank you, it's always important depending on what time of the economy is. It can be more or less difficult to get a job. It got me out of Ohio, which is nice because I liked boats, and it's kind of hard to do a lot. There's a little bit on the Ohio River, but not that much.
Great Lakes.
I'm from Cincinnati.
Okay.
So I had the Ohio River. Great Lakes would have been a great one, but I just wasn't there. So it got me out of Ohio. It got me an education, so they paid for my bachelor's degree through the ROTC program, and it's gotten me all over the place. So I've been stationed here in Groton, Connecticut. I've been in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Even been in Millington, Tennessee, which right outside of Memphis. Never thought that there's a Navy base there, but there is. It's where we do some of our admin work is out of there. But I've gotten to see the world from Spain, Limassol, Greece, Suda Bay, Greece, Bahrain, Diego Garcia, to Japan, Guam, South Korea, Philippines. I've seen all those countries and all through the Navy. So
doesn't the world look the same when you're 500 feet underneath?
Yeah, you pull into port eventually.
Commander Boyd, thanks for taking the time to actually role play the Nautilus' story today. I think it's a really unique story. I'll be exiting here and going through the museum myself. But
okay.
Anything else that you'd like to say as Commander Boyd?
No, thank you for the time.
All right, thank you. Guys, we'll see you next time.